What began as a professional assignment slowly revealed something deeper. A man who built permanence to escape loss, and a woman who believed love could only survive if it was allowed to change. This is not a story about danger or rescue. It's about the quiet choices that decide whether love becomes a shelter or a cage. He had one choice: protect the past or risk the future. Hello, family. Welcome to this channel. Drop your city in the comment section so I can send you special greetings. Now let's go deep into the story. The building did not look like a tomb. That was the first thing Kiwon noticed as she stood across the street, portfolio tucked under her arm, eyes tracing the structure's edges. No Gothic arches, no funereal symbolism, just clean geometry, pale stone, and an unsettling stillness, like a place that had decided long ago it would not age. It sat in a quiet New Jersey district where redevelopment usually meant glass towers and cafes with exposed brick. This building rejected all of that. It did not invite curiosity. It waited. Yoon Seojin was already inside. She knew this because his email had arrived at 4:12 a.m., precise and brief. I prefer to meet before the city wakes. The space speaks more clearly then. Kiwon had not replied with questions. She had learned, in her line of work, that people who wrote like that did not enjoy being studied. They preferred to be interpreted later. The doors opened without sound. Inside, the air was cool, not artificially cold, but preserved. The walls were lined with brushed stone panels that caught the light softly, as if refusing to shine too brightly. There was gold here, but not in the way people expected. Not ornamental, not decorative. It was embedded, threaded into seams, framing edges, reinforcing corners. Gold as reinforcement. Gold as insistence. "You're early," a voice said. Seojin stood near the center of the atrium, hands clasped behind his back. He was dressed simply, dark trousers, white shirt, no jacket. His posture was calm, but not relaxed, like someone who had trained himself never to lean too far into comfort. "You asked for before sunrise," Kiwon replied. A faint nod, approval, not gratitude. "You've reviewed the materials." "Yes." "And you still accepted." "I did." He gestured for her to walk. As they moved through the corridors, he explained the project in measured tones. The building was privately funded. No donors, no public board, no historical committee. It would house curated narratives, letters, artifacts, recorded memories, a preservation of lived experience. "Whose?" Kiwon asked. Seojin paused. "People who mattered," he said. "Not people who matter, past tense." They entered a circular chamber at the heart of the structure. The gold was more visible here, not bright, but absolute. The walls curved inward slightly, creating the sense of being held rather than enclosed. "This is where the core archive will sit," Seojin said. "Nothing here will ever be altered once sealed." Kiwon felt it then, not fear, pressure. "And if context changes?" she asked. "Interpretation evolves, history isn't static." "That's the point," he replied evenly. "This will be." She looked at him for the first time fully. His face held no anger, no defensiveness, only certainty. That was what unsettled her. Most preservation projects fought decay. This one fought time itself. "I was hired as an archivist," Kiwon said carefully. "My role is to contextualize, not entomb." A long silence followed. Then Seojin spoke. "You were hired because you don't romanticize loss." That stopped her. "I read your work," he continued. "You write about memory as a living thing, something that must be allowed to change, even if it becomes unrecognizable. And yet you're building something that refuses that premise," she said. "Yes." They stood across from each other, the gold-lined walls listening. "This building," he said, "is not about peace, it's about permanence." Kiwon understood then. This was not a memorial. It was a refusal. And by accepting this job, she had stepped inside someone else's fear. By the third week, Kiwon learned how the building breathed, or rather, how it didn't. There were no windows in the inner corridors. Light was controlled, measured, filtered. Every temperature shift, every acoustic adjustment had been calibrated months before she arrived. Seo-jin approved everything remotely, even when he was physically present. Nothing happened without intention. She found herself working late, not because she was asked to, but because leaving felt abrupt, like stepping out mid-conversation. Seo-jin rarely interrupted her process. He watched, listened, occasionally asked questions that were not questions at all. "What happens," he asked one evening, "when a memory contradicts itself?" "It survives," Ki-won said. "Contradiction is proof it lived." He considered that. "You speak as if memory has agency." "It does," she replied. "We just pretend it doesn't so we can control it." That earned a faint smile, the first she'd seen. They began taking breaks together in the unfinished upper wing, sitting on the floor with paper cups of coffee. Their conversations never drifted toward romance. They circled heavier things: inheritance, legacy, the difference between remembering and preserving. One night, Ki-won asked, "Who is this for?" Seo-jin didn't answer immediately. "Someone I lost," he said finally, "and someone I don't want to lose again." She didn't ask which was which. A week later, Soo-hyun arrived. She came with confidence, heels echoing too loudly against the quiet stone, gold jewelry catching light without asking permission. She and Seo-jin greeted each other like people who shared history, but no nostalgia. "I hear you've turned grief into architecture," Soo-hyun said lightly, glancing around. "This isn't grief," Seo-jin replied. "It's intention." Soo-hyun smiled. "That's what grief always says." She pitched her proposal that afternoon: public funding, global partnerships, the mausoleum as brand, a fixed narrative endlessly reproduced. "This becomes immortal," she said, "and so do you." Ki-won watched Seo-jin's face. He was tempted. Not by money, by certainty. Later that night, Seo-jin stood alone in the core chamber. Ki-won found him there, hands pressed lightly against the gold-lined wall. "She wants to make this visible," he said without turning. "Unquestionable." "And you?" Ki-won asked. "I want it to never be misunderstood." She stepped closer. "That's impossible." He remembered the way she said contradiction was proof of life. For the first time, the building felt smaller. The argument did not come suddenly. It unfolded. Seo-jin approved Soo-hyun's feasibility study. Ki-won was copied on the email, her name listed as consultant, not partner. The distinction mattered. She confronted him not with anger, but with a question. "If this becomes public," she asked, "what happens to the stories that don't fit?" "They won't be included," he said simply. "That's erasure." "No," he corrected, "that's curation." They stood in the atrium, the building quiet around them. "You're afraid," Ki-won said, "not of losing the past, but of letting the future touch it." Seo-jin's voice tightened. "You think I don't know that?" "Then why build a place that can't grow?" "Because growth changes things." "And love does?" she asked softly. That landed. Days later, Soo-hyun returned with contracts, pressed timelines, an unveiling date. The inner chamber was scheduled to be sealed. Ki-won packed her things. On her last night, she left a single document on the central table, an alternative archive plan, living exhibits, rotating narratives, space for contradiction. No note. Just possibility. The next morning, Seo-jin stood alone in the core chamber as the sealing crew waited. Gold plates ready, final measurements taken. He thought of certainty, of silence, of a future preserved so tightly it could not escape him. Then he remembered Ki-won's voice. Memory survives because it changes. "Stop," he said. The room stilled. He ordered the core opened, not sealed. Gold removed. Walls adjusted. The mausoleum exhaled for the first time. Ki-won would hear about it later. And when she returned, it would not be to work. It would be to choose. Ki-won did not return immediately. That in itself was a decision. She took a temporary consulting role at a small community archive in Philadelphia, one that operated out of a converted library with creaking floors and mismatched chairs. The kind of place where people argued over dates and still laughed afterward. Nothing was sealed. Nothing was permanent. It felt alive in a way she hadn't realized she missed. She followed the news of the mausoleum from a distance. The sealed chamber had been dismantled. The unveiling postponed indefinitely. Speculation filled the vacuum, financial blogs wondering whether Seojin had lost confidence, architectural forums debating whether the structure had lost its conceptual spine. No one mentioned fear. No one ever did. Seojin did not contact her. Weeks passed. Then one afternoon, a package arrived at the archive. No return address. Inside was a single brass key and a folded floor plan, revised. The inner chamber no longer marked final. It was labeled transitional. At the bottom, written in careful handwriting, "Nothing here is finished without you deciding it is." Ki-won stared at the note longer than she expected to. Returning was not inevitable. It was not romantic. It was not dramatic. It was deliberate. When she stepped back into the mausoleum, the space felt different. Not warmer, not brighter. Looser. Walls once rigid now held modular frames. Empty mounts waited without urgency. The building no longer insisted on silence. It allowed it. Seojin met her in the atrium, expression unreadable. "You changed the structure," she said. "I changed myself first," he replied. They stood there, no apologies offered, none requested. That night, they worked side by side, redesigning the archive's core philosophy. Not erasing the past, not glorifying it. Letting it speak and argue with itself. Soo-hyun did not disappear quietly. She arrived with restraint this time, no entourage, no contracts, just questions. "You gave up certainty," she said to Seojin as they stood overlooking the now-open chamber. "Do you understand what that costs?" "Yes," he replied. "That's why I did it." She turned to Ki-won. "And you're comfortable with instability?" Ki-won considered the question. "I'm comfortable with honesty." Soo-hyun exhaled, the sound sharp. "You're choosing difficulty over legacy." "No," Seojin said. "I'm choosing a legacy that survives being challenged." Soo-hyun studied them, really studied them for the first time. "You're building something no one can control," she said. "That's the point," Ki-won answered. Soo-hyun nodded slowly, not defeated, recalibrating. "I won't fund this," she said, "but I won't stop it either." When she left, the building did not close in behind her. That night, Seojin and Ki-won sat in the upper wing again, coffee between them. "This doesn't guarantee anything," Seojin said. "It could fail." "I know," Ki-won replied, "but failure wouldn't be silence." He looked at her then, not as an architect of memory, not as a consultant. As someone who stayed after the doors were unlocked. The opening day arrived without fanfare. No press conference, no ribbon, just doors open to a small group, students, historians, neighbors, people whose stories contradicted one another before they even entered the building. Some exhibits unsettled visitors, others sparked debate. A few were quietly removed weeks later after new information surfaced. The building changed. So did Seojin. He no longer stood apart from the crowd. He listened. He revised. He let parts of the project go when they no longer served the truth. One evening, long after closing, Ki-won stood alone in the transitional chamber. "This place isn't yours anymore," she said when Seojin joined her. "I know," he replied. "That's why it finally feels honest." She turned to him, "And us?" He didn't answer immediately. "We aren't sealed," he said finally. "We aren't preserved, we're chosen every day." That was enough. Not a promise of permanence. A commitment to presence. Outside, the city moved. Inside, the mausoleum lived, not as a prison of gold, but as a space that trusted time to do its work. And for the first time, neither of them feared what time might bring. The first real test of the mausoleum did not come from critics or investors. It came from people who did not ask permission. A local historian challenged one of the early exhibits, arguing that its narrative leaned too heavily on personal testimony without enough corroboration. A graduate student wrote an essay questioning whether the building's refusal to settle a story created confusion rather than clarity. A visitor left a handwritten note in the suggestion box that simply read, "I don't know what I'm supposed to feel here." Kiwon read every response. She spread them across a long table in the upper wing, sorting not by praise or criticism, but by intent. Curiosity, discomfort, resistance, engagement, silence. "This is working," she said quietly. Seo-jin stood across from her, hands resting on the edge of the table. "Some people think it's unfinished." "It is," she replied. "That's the point." He nodded, but the uncertainty didn't leave his eyes. He had built his life on systems that produced outcomes, markets, structures, returns. This place resisted all of that. It asked him to trust a process he could not fully model. That night after closing, they walked through the building together, not as curator and financier, as witnesses. In the transitional chamber, a temporary installation displayed 3 conflicting accounts of the same historical event. No conclusion, no verdict, just voices placed side by side. "I used to believe clarity was kindness," Seo-jin said, "that if people knew exactly what something meant, they would feel safer." "And now?" Kiwon asked. "And now I think safety is overrated," he said. "Understanding is harder, but it lasts longer." Their relationship had changed quietly alongside the building. There were no declarations, no turning points that could be pointed to and named. They cooked together sometimes, argued about small things, music volume, scheduling, how much silence was too much. They learned the texture of each other's presence. One evening, Seo-jin received an offer he hadn't expected. A global cultural foundation wanted to replicate the mausoleum's concept in 3 cities overseas. Same design language, same curatorial philosophy. His name would anchor it. The legacy Soo-hyun had once promised, just reshaped. "It would stabilize everything," he said, handing Kiwon the proposal. "Funding, influence, longevity." She read it carefully, then she looked up. "And what would we lose?" He didn't answer immediately. They both knew the truth. Replication required simplification. Stories would need to be standardized, ambiguity reduced. The building would become a model instead of a conversation. "It wouldn't destroy what we've built," Seo-jin said slowly, "but it would change its center." Ki-won folded the proposal. "Then the question isn't whether it's good," she said. "It's whether it's honest." That night, Seo-jin lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about permanence again. Not as a structure, but as a temptation. In the morning, he declined the offer. No announcement, no justification. Just a decision. The mausoleum remained singular. And in choosing that, so did they. Success did not arrive as celebration. It arrived as responsibility. Visitor numbers grew steadily, not explosively, but consistently. Universities reached out. Community groups requested space. The mausoleum became a place people argued inside and returned to afterward. It gained a reputation for being difficult in the best way. With that came pressure. Ki-won found herself mediating disputes she hadn't anticipated. Which stories deserved space? Who decided when a narrative caused more harm than insight? Where did openness end and care begin? One afternoon, a donor offered a significant contribution with conditions. A permanent exhibit, fixed language, no revisions. "We could use the funds," Seo-jin said after the meeting. "They'd allow us to expand programming." "And the cost?" Ki-won asked. He exhaled. "A sealed room." The words hung between them. They had avoided absolutes in their relationship, but this felt close to one. Ki-won walked through the building alone that evening, thinking about the work she'd chosen. This place asked her to stand in uncertainty every day, to disappoint people, to say no without becoming rigid. She found Seo-jin in the atrium, staring up at the ceiling. "I won't stay," she said, "if this becomes what it was designed not to be." He turned to her. "And if refusing means losing everything?" "Then we lose it honestly," she replied. Seo-jin studied her face, not searching for resolve but recognizing it. "You know," he said quietly, "there was a time when I thought letting someone matter this much was irresponsible." "And now?" she asked. "And now I think refusing to let someone matter is fear, pretending to be discipline." They declined the donation. The following weeks were difficult. Budgets tightened. Staff adjusted. Some collaborators left. But something else happened. Smaller donors stepped in. Volunteers offered time. Universities partnered without conditions. The building did not grow faster, but it grew deeper. One evening, after a long day, Seo-jin placed a small velvet box on the table between them. "This isn't an ending," he said. "It's a choice." Inside was no extravagant ring, just a simple band, unadorned. Ki-won closed the box gently. "Yes," she said, "but not because it completes anything." "Because it commits to continuing," he replied. She smiled. They decided together. No audience, no announcement. The mausoleum remained open the next morning. So did they. Years later, people would ask how the mausoleum survived when so many cultural projects faded. Seo-jin never gave a satisfying answer. Sometimes he said it was because they resisted growth for growth's sake. Sometimes he said it was because they allowed disagreement to live inside the walls. Once, he said simply, "We didn't build it to last forever. We built it to stay honest." Ki-won continued curating, teaching, challenging. She published essays that unsettled readers who wanted conclusions. She refused to become a spokesperson for certainty. Their partnership became known quietly, not as a power couple, but as a shared practice. Decisions were debated. Authority was distributed. Neither of them pretended love made things easier. It made them truer. On the anniversary of the mausoleum's opening, they stood again in the transitional chamber. The gold was still there, but it no longer dominated. It framed rather than confined. "Do you ever miss the idea of permanence?" Ki-won asked. Seo-jin considered the question. "Sometimes," he said, "but I don't miss the fear that came with it." Outside, new visitors entered. Inside, old exhibits shifted. The building aged, not decayed, but adapted. And that was the achievement. Not the structure, not the legacy, but the decision to love.